Hey Downtimers, today we're going to look at something I like to call timber tops. You'll notice the piece of wood that I use here for this particular timber top is a little longer than the base block to the right there, and that's because I like eaves. So if you want a little overhang for your shop fronts and for your house fronts and so forth, you'll want the length to be a little bit longer, so you'll select a piece of 2x4 that's just a little bit longer than the base block. I'm not very picky about my scroll saw blades, but when I cut through a piece of thick wood like a 2x4, I typically want to go for as few teeth as possible on the saw blade, so I use 15s for this. If you can get less teeth than that, you'll probably notice that it might cut a little bit easier for you. Also, you want to set your scroll saw to about 30 degrees, and you'll notice I set mine to probably just a little bit less than that. I find the easiest way to get the cut line for this is to simply push the 2x4 into the scroll saw blade and then use the Lego T-square to mark the top based off that cut. You want to take your time with this cut. It's going to take a little while, so don't push too hard. You do want to be firm, but you also don't want the blade to overheat and break. As always, when working with a saw, you want to be very careful about where you're placing your fingers, and especially your thumbs. And so, of course, we'll use the same technique for the other side. And you notice the first two cuts are rip cuts, they're with the grain, and so the last two cuts will be cross cuts. The way I normally do the cross cuts is I line the blade up to the wood where it should be, and I simply eyeball where the blade should go through the wood to make the cross cut. If you don't like eyeballing it like this, you can simply measure your first cut, or measure that first mark that you did with the first cut line from the edge to the cut line on the rip cut, and then that will tell you exactly how far in your cut line should be all the way around. Now, after the two rip cuts and the two cross cuts, now we're ready to sand. We want to be sure to sand off all the edges. We don't want any sharp edges, and of course we want to sand all the flat cuts so that they're nice and smooth. And you definitely want to sand down the points because they will actually be pretty sharp after you're done cutting. Now we're going to do what we call pinstriping. We're going to use a pencil. And if you have some straight edges, that might help a little bit here because it's a little bit awkward to measure and mark on these angles for the timber top. So as you see, I use my two Lego plastic T-squares. One's a little bit more than an inch wide and the other's a little more than a ½ inch wide. If you want to have flat edges for all the markings, you can simply get a piece of cardboard and cut the cardboard strips at 1/4 increments, so 1/4 inch wide, a ½ inch wide, 3/4 wide, and so forth. And that way you'll have one flat edge for each mark that you'll need along the edge of the timber top. I really like having a flat top to the timber top piece because I like having a nice space where I can put one or maybe even multiple miniatures on that for battle purposes. Maybe a watchman or a guard is on top of that. So there's lots of different ways you can use this, and that's the reason why I like keeping a flat top. It just makes it a lot more playable. And I just use my ruler and mark lines at every 1/4 inch on the very top, just like we normally do with our timber terrain pieces. Now what I normally do for the rest of the lines, since I only have 2 lines, so we're going to have way more rows of shingles than that, is I'll just find the center point between what I have from the straight edges and what I need. So for example, for the first line, that's going to be the second row of shingles, so I'm going to get the center point from that to the edge of the piece, and then that's going to help me figure out where that first line should be. And as you go around, it gets easier because then you can use the lines that you've drawn out on previous sides, and of course on the last side it'll be really easy because you're just going to join those lines together. So you're going to use the adjacent sides to help you figure out where the line should be on the final side. Now we're ready to make these rows look a little more like shingles, and the way I do this is I measure out the shingles to be about 1 inch in width. So I'll start with the center point at the top row and I'll branch out from there, and I'll just eyeball and alternate between rows after that. So center point on the top row, the second row I'll offset those by 1 inch, the third row I'll have center point again, and so on and so forth. It's pretty easy to see how I do this. On the very ends, on the bottom row, I just measure out pretty close to the very edge of the top and just bring that down. And I use the same method on all 4 sides, obviously, but on the shorter sides I usually go about 3/4 inch for the width of the shingles. And now we're ready to wood burn. So once we have all the lines drawn, we can go ahead, break out the wood burner, and start burning just like we normally do for all the other timber terrain pieces. Always burn around the edges, all the edges, the top and along the sides and even along the bottom. And also add a lot of small with the grain marks, especially for the shingles. One tip concerning the line separating the shingles is to burn it so that you make an indentation that is thin at the top and splayed or fanned out at the bottom. This is the same technique I use on the base blocks, and I think it helps to show separation between shingles or separation between the boards. It really helps to make it look like the timber top is made up of individual shingles. And now that we're done with all the wood burning, we're going to start painting. And of course, you know what paint we're going to use for this. It's the same paint that we've used for all the timber terrain pieces. And we're also going to use the same painting techniques that we've used before with the timber terrain system. So we're going to use watered down paint, and then we're going to use a thick amount of paint on the brush, and we're going to kind of alternate. And the whole idea is we want to show contrast, and I really like showing a lot of contrast with the shingles, but you need to be careful that it doesn't come across in a checkerboard fashion. So some of the shingles you might want to paint in a similar tone next to each other, and so you want to be sure you don't alternate and stay too strict of a pattern of alternating with the shingles. You want to kind of mix it up a little bit so it doesn't come across as a checkerboard or otherwise just a little too organized. And that's it for the timber tops. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I actually did this because I had a couple people requesting a video on how to do the timber tops. So really appreciate the feedback, guys. Thanks a lot. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so now. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.